The notification lit up my phone screen at 2:47 p.m. a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a particularly tedious meeting about quarterly projections. I glanced down, expecting another work email or perhaps a reminder about picking up groceries. Instead, I saw a message from Mom in our family group chat. We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate. I stared at the words, reading them once, then twice, then a third time. The message sat there innocuously beneath a string of earlier texts about weekend plans and someone's new recipe for lemon bars. No context, no explanation, just that single, matter-of-fact statement that somehow managed to sound both casual and ominous at the same time. My finger hovered over the keyboard, crafting and deleting half a dozen responses. Why seemed confrontational. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Felt too passive. What's going on? Sounded paranoid. In the end, I typed something diplomatic and hit send. Oh, okay. Any particular reason? Everything all right? 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating Mom was typing. They bounced for what felt like an eternity before disappearing. Then they appeared again, then vanished once more. Finally, after what must have been 2 full minutes of this digital dance, a response came through. Just thought it was time. The all blocks were getting worn out anyway. Dad will drop off your new key this weekend. I leaned back in my office chair, the leather creaking beneath me as I processed this information. On the surface, it was perfectly reasonable. I was 28 years old, had been living on my own for 6 years, and had my own apartment across town. My parents changing their locks shouldn't have been a big deal. People upgraded their home security all the time. It was practical, sensible even, but something about the message nagged at me, like a splinter just beneath the skin that you can't quite reach. Maybe it was the specificity of mentioning both the front door and the gate. Maybe it was the timing, coming completely out of nowhere on a random Tuesday. Or maybe it was the careful neutrality of Mom's follow-up message, which somehow managed to answer my question while revealing absolutely nothing. Everything okay? My colleague, Marcus, poked his head into my office, startling me out of my thoughts. Yeah, fine, I said, tucking my phone away. Just family stuff. Marcus nodded knowingly, as if those 2 words explained everything. In a way, they did. He retreated back to his own desk, and I tried to focus on the spreadsheet open on my computer screen, but the numbers blurred together, and my mind kept drifting back to that message. We changed all the locks. The thing about families is that they have their own language, their own codes and signals that outsiders wouldn't recognize. To anyone else, my mother's message might have seemed perfectly innocuous, but I'd grown up in that house, in that family, and I knew the difference between information and declaration. This wasn't Mom letting me know about a home improvement project. This was Mom telling me something had changed. And not just the locks. I made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, my body present, but my mind elsewhere. During the commute home, I found myself analyzing recent family interactions like a detective searching for clues. Had I missed something, done something, said something? The last time I'd been home was 2 weeks ago for Sunday dinner. It had been pleasant enough, at least by our family's standards. My younger sister, Rachel, had been there with her fiancé, Tom. We'd eaten pot roast and discussed Rachel's wedding plans, which were proceeding with all the organizational complexity of a military operation. Dad had been quieter than usual, but Dad was often quiet. Mom had seemed normal, bustling between the kitchen and dining room, making sure everyone had enough food, enough drinks, enough attention. Had there been any tension, any undercurrents I'd missed while focused on my own plate and my own thoughts? I replayed the evening in my mind as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, juggling my work bag and keys. Rachel had been animated, talking about flowers and venues and guest lists. Tom had been politely engaged, contributing when appropriate, but clearly content to let his bride-to-be take the lead. Mom had been supportive, offering suggestions and asking questions. And Dad had excused himself early, saying he had some work to finish in his study. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Dad ran his own small accounting firm from a home office, and tax season was perpetually busy. But now, examining the memory with fresh scrutiny, I remembered Mom's expression when he left the table. It had been neutral, carefully so, the kind of neutrality that require effort. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag on the couch and pulled out my phone again. The family group chat showed no new messages. I scrolled up, looking for anything I might have missed in recent weeks. There were the usual exchanges, reminders about appointments, shared news articles, photos of my parents cat doing something supposedly adorable. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I opened a private text thread with Rachel. "Did you see Mom's message about the locks?" Rachel responded almost instantly, which meant she'd probably been waiting for someone else to bring it up. "Yes." "So weird, right?" I asked her about it and she just said the same thing about them being old. "Do you think something happened?" "I don't know. Maybe someone tried to break in." The thought sent a cold spike through my chest. My parents lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the most exciting crime was occasionally someone's newspaper being delivered to the wrong house. But break-ins could happen anywhere, I supposed. "Did you ask her directly?" "You know how Mom gets when you push." She just kept saying it was no big deal and changing the subject. I did know how Mom gets. She had a remarkable ability to deflect unwanted questions while making you feel like you were being unreasonable for asking them in the first place. "What do you think is going on?" 3 dots appeared, bounced, then disappeared. Rachel was choosing her words carefully, which meant she had theories, but wasn't sure she should share them. "Honestly, I think something's up with Mom and Dad. They've been weird lately." "Weird how?" "I can't explain it exactly. Just off. Less chatty when I call. More formal with each other." "Have you noticed Dad's been basically living in his office?" I hadn't noticed. But then again, I'd been busy with my own life, my own problems. Work had been demanding, and I'd been seeing someone new. Though that situation was complicated in its own right. I made it to Sunday dinners most weeks, called Mom every few days, texted in the family chat. By conventional standards, I was a reasonably attentive adult child. But Rachel was right. I hadn't been paying close enough attention to notice the subtle shifts in our family's ecosystem. "You think they're having problems?" "I don't know, maybe. I'm probably overthinking it. Wedding stress has me seeing drama everywhere, right? Well, let me know if you hear anything else. You too?" I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to the muffled sounds of my upstairs neighbor's footsteps and the distant wail of a siren. My parents having marital problems seemed both impossible and entirely plausible. They'd been married for 33 years, together since college. They were the stable foundation upon which Rachel and I had built our understanding of what relationships look like. They weren't passionate or dramatic, but they were steady, reliable, permanent. But people changed, didn't they? Marriages evolved or dissolved. Kids moved out and couples had to remember how to be just to people again instead of parents. Maybe the locks were symbolic rather than literal. Maybe Mom was creating new boundaries, new separations, or maybe, I thought with forced optimism, maybe Rachel and I were both reading way too much into a simple home maintenance decision. Wednesday morning brought another message from Dad in the family chat. This one characteristically brief. "Can drop off keys Thursday evening round 6. Let me know if you'll be home." I confirmed I would be, then spent the rest of the day distracted at work. Marcus caught me staring blankly at my computer screen round 3 o'clock and suggested I take a walk to clear my head. I did, circling the block 3 times while trying to talk myself out of spiraling into anxiety. Thursday evening arrived with all the weight of an impending revelation. I'd cleaned my apartment, which I realized halfway through was ridiculous since Dad was just dropping off a key. But nervous energy needed an outlet, and scrubbing the kitchen gave my hands something to do while my mind raced through possibilities. The buzzer rang at precisely 6 o'clock. Dad had always been punctual to the point of compulsion. "Hey, Dad," I said, opening the door to find him standing in the hallway holding a small envelope. "Hello, sweetheart." He stepped inside, and I immediately noticed he looked tired, not just end of the day tired, but deeply exhausted in a way that seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond the physical. His shirt was wrinkled, unusual for a man who normally took pride in his appearance, and there was gray stubble on his jaw that suggested he'd skipped shaving that morning. "You want some coffee? Water?" I gestured toward the kitchen. No, I can't stay long. Just wanted to get you this." He handed me the envelope, which contained 2 shiny new keys on a ring. I turned them over in my hand, studying them as if they might reveal secrets. "So, new locks, huh? Your mother's idea," Dad said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. She wanted to upgrade the security. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" Dad sighed and moved to my couch, sitting down heavily. This was unexpected. He'd said he couldn't stay long, but now he seemed to be settling in, or at least bracing himself for a conversation he didn't want to have. "Your mother and I are going through some things," he said finally, each word seeming to cost him effort. My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "We're just figuring some stuff out. Nothing for you to worry about." But his expression betrayed the lightness he was attempting in his words. "Dad, changing the lock seems like something I should worry about." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of frustration or exhaustion or both. "Your mother wanted to feel like she had more control over her space. I'm spending more time at the office anyway, so it made sense." The implications hung in the air between us. "You're spending more time at the office because you're working late, or because your mother and I need some space right now." The words hit me like cold water. My parents, my steady, reliable, boring parents, were separating. Not divorced, maybe, but definitely not together in the way they had been. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months. We've been trying to work through it." But he trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished because there was no good way to complete it. "Does Rachel know?" "We're planning to talk to both of you together this weekend." I probably shouldn't have said anything yet, but you asked directly, and I've never been good at lying to you. This was true. Dad was constitutionally incapable of deception, which made him an excellent accountant and a terrible poker player. "What happened?" I asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too broad, too demanding, too much like asking him to distill the complexity of a 33-year relationship into a simple explanation. But Dad surprised me by answering, "Nothing happened." Exactly. That's almost the problem. We just woke up one day and realized we'd been living parallel lives for years. Your mother has her routines, I have mine. We're roommates who happen to be married, and neither of us can remember when it started feeling that way. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to argue, to point out all the ways they were still a couple, still connected. But another part of me, the part that had been home for countless Sunday dinners and observed them with the selective blindness of a child, recognized the truth in what he was saying. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we figure out if we want to find our way back to each other, or if it's time to accept that we've grown into different people who want different things." And the locks. Your mother wanted to feel like the house was hers in a way it hasn't been in a while. I've been staying at the office most nights. I have a couch there, a bathroom. It's not ideal, but it gives us both space to think. I looked down at the keys in my hand, understanding now that they represented something much more significant than new hardware. They were Mom establishing boundaries, claiming territory, creating a space that was explicitly hers to control. "I'm sorry, Dad, don't be. These things happen. Your mother and I, we love each other. We probably always will. But love isn't always enough to make a marriage work." He stood up, straightening his wrinkled shirt. "We'll talk more this weekend, all four of us. Your mother wants to make sure you and Rachel understand what's happening." After he left, I sat alone in my apartment with the new keys on my coffee table, feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted without warning. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Did Dad seem okay to you when he dropped off your keys?" So she'd gotten her delivery too, and her own version of this conversation. We should talk. Can you come over? On my way, Rachel arrived 30 minutes later with a bottle of wine and eyes already red from crying. We sat on my couch, and she told me her version of the conversation with Dad. It matched mine in all the essential details but included additional information about Mom having recently started therapy and Dad looking into getting his own place. How did we not see this? Rachel asked, pouring us both generous glasses of wine. Because they didn't want us to see it, I said. Because they're our parents, and they've spent their entire lives protecting us from things that might hurt us. We're not children anymore. To them, we'll always be children. We drank our wine and picked at the takeout Thai food Rachel had ordered on her phone. Neither of us particularly hungry, but both needing something to do with our hands. The conversation meandered through memories, trying to pinpoint when exactly our parents had stopped being a unit and become two people orbiting each other. Remember how Dad used to bring Mom coffee in bed every morning? Rachel said suddenly. When did he stop doing that? I don't know. Years ago, probably. We just didn't notice because we weren't there to see it anymore. That was the thing about growing up and moving out. You maintain the image of your childhood home. It existed when you left it, not accounting for all the small changes that accumulated in your absence. Mom and Dad's marriage had been evolving or devolving, and Rachel and I had been too caught up in our own lives to notice the transformation. What do you think is going to happen? Rachel asked. I don't know. Dad seemed pretty resigned to the whole thing. Mom won't talk to me about it at all. I tried calling her after Dad left, and she just kept saying we'd discuss it this weekend. She needs to control the narrative, I said, understanding my mother perhaps better than I wanted to. She wants to present this in a specific way, with both of us present, so she only has to say it once. God, this is so messed up. I'm supposed to be planning a wedding, thinking about starting my own marriage. And now I'm watching my parents' marriage fall apart. I reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. Your wedding will be beautiful, and your marriage will be nothing like Mom and Dad's because you and Tom are nothing like Mom and Dad. How can you be sure? Because you already communicate better than they ever did. Because you actually talk about your feelings instead of letting them calcify into resentment. Rachel gave me a watery smile. When did you become so wise? Probably around the time I started paying for my own therapy. We laughed, the sound brittle, but genuine, and finished the wine. Sunday arrived with all the appeal of a dental appointment. Rachel and I had agreed to arrive at our parents' house together, presenting a united front, or perhaps just seeking comfort and solidarity. We pulled up at 1:30, half an hour after the designated meeting time, because Rachel had been moving in slow motion all morning, prolonging the inevitable. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, a well-maintained two-story colonial in soft blue with white trim, surrounded by Mom's meticulously tended garden. The gate that had received new locks stood slightly ajar, as if in welcome, though the gesture felt more ironic than inviting given the circumstances. I used my new key in the front door, the lock turning smoothly, and we stepped into the foyer that had seen us through every phase of our lives. School photos still lined the hallway wall, a chronological journey from gap-toothed childhood through awkward adolescence to our current adult iterations. Girls, Mom's voice came from the living room. We found both our parents there, sitting in their usual chairs, but with a careful distance between them that spoke volumes. Mom had dressed up slightly, wearing a nice sweater and actual jewelry, as if this were a special occasion rather than a family crisis. Dad wore jeans and a button-down shirt, his version of casual but still put together. Sit down, Mom said, gesturing to the couch. Can I get you anything? I made cookies. Mom, Rachel said gently. We don't need cookies. We just need you to talk to us. Mom's composure cracked slightly around the edges before she reinforced it. Right. Of course, we all sat in a tableau that felt simultaneously familiar and completely alien. How many conversations had we had in this room? How many Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, casual Sunday afternoons? But this was different, and the weight of that difference pressed down on all of us. Your father and I want to talk to you about some changes happening in our lives. Mom began, her tone carefully measured as if she'd rehearsed this speech multiple times. As you may have noticed, we've been going through a difficult period in our marriage. We hadn't actually noticed until the lock situation, I said, not unkindly but wanting to be honest. Mom looked briefly surprised, then thoughtful. I suppose we've been good at keeping up appearances. Maybe too good. Dad added quietly. Mom shot him a look that I couldn't quite interpret before continuing. The point is, your father and I have realized that we've grown apart over the years. We still care about each other deeply, but we're not sure we're still the right partners for each other. We've decided to try a trial separation to figure out what we both want. How long is trial? Rachel asked. We're thinking 6 months, Dad said. I've rented a small apartment not far from my office. We'll continue to co-parent you two. He paused, recognizing the absurdity of the phrase given that we were adults. Well, continue to be your parents. Obviously, this doesn't change how we feel about either of you. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I asked. Rachel said this has been going on for months. We wanted to be sure before we worried you, Mom said. We thought maybe we could work through it on our own. And can you? Rachel's voice was small, younger than her 25 years. Mom and Dad exchanged a look loaded with a complicated history that Rachel and I could only partially understand. We don't know yet, Mom admitted. That's what the separation is for, to see if absence makes the heart grow fonder, or if we're better off as friends who used to be married. The clinical way she described the potential dissolution of their marriage was somehow more unsettling than if she'd been emotional. This was Mom in control, Mom managing a situation, Mom presenting a carefully curated version of events that gave us information without making us feel the full weight of what the information meant. What can we do? I asked, feeling helpless. Just be patient with us, Dad said, and know that this isn't about anything you did or didn't do. This is about your mother and me figuring out who we are as individuals after spending most of our adult lives as a unit. We talked for another hour, circling round the same points from different angles. Rachel asked about holidays and family gatherings. I asked about logistics and finances. Mom assured us that everything would be handled fairly and amicably. Dad promised he wasn't abandoning the family, just taking space to think. Through it all, I kept noticing small details that told the real story beneath their carefully managed narrative. The way Mom's hands twisted in her lap when talking about the separation timeline. The way Dad's gaze drifted to family photos on the mantle with something like longing or regret. The careful distance they maintained from each other, as if touching might break whatever fragile peace they'd negotiated. When Rachel and I finally left, stepping out into the afternoon sunshine that felt inappropriately cheerful, we stood by our cars for a long moment without speaking. That was awful, Rachel said finally. Yeah, do you think they'll get back together? I thought about the tired resignation in Dad's voice, the determined control in Mom's. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me thinks they've already made their decision, and the separation is just a formality to make it seem like they tried everything. That's depressing. It's realistic. Rachel hugged me tightly, and I hugged her back, both of us clinging to each other the way we had when we were children, and the world felt scary. Then we got in our respective cars and drove to our respective homes, carrying the weight of our parents' failing marriage into our separate lives. The weeks that followed required a recalibration of what family meant. Dad moved into his apartment, a sparse one-bedroom in a building near his office that he described as functional in a way that suggested he'd given up on making any space feel like home. Mom threw herself into home improvement projects, repainting the guest room and reorganizing the garage with manic energy that concerned both Rachel and me. Sunday dinners continued, but they were fractured now. Some weeks we'd go to Mom's house. Others we'd meet Dad at a restaurant. Occasionally, in what felt like exercises in masochism, we'd all try to gather together, and the awkwardness would be so thick you could practically see it hanging in the air between the appetizers and the main course. I found myself becoming the family coordinator, the one who checked in on both parents separately and tried to maintain some semblance of connection between all of us. It was exhausting and it wasn't a role I'd asked for. But Rachel was dealing with wedding planning and her own anxieties, and someone needed to hold things together. "How's Mom?" Dad would ask during our phone calls. "How's Dad?" Mom would inquire when I visited. I'd give them both carefully edited versions of the truth, filtering out the sadness and highlighting anything positive or neutral. Mom was taking a pottery class. Dad had joined a gym. They were both fine, I'd assure them. The fine was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. About 6 weeks into the separation, I met someone who complicated my emotional landscape in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her name was Caroline, and we met at a friend's birthday party. She was funny and smart and had a directness about her that I found both intimidating and appealing. We'd been on 3 dates when she asked about my family. "It's complicated," I said, which was both true and evasive. "Most families are," she replied, and I found myself telling her everything about the Locks, the separation, the strange grief of watching your parents' marriage dissolve when you're old enough to understand all the factors, but still young enough to want to believe in permanence. Caroline listened without judgment, and then she said something that stuck with me. "You know, sometimes the kindest thing people can do for each other is acknowledge when they're no longer right together." It was the perspective I hadn't considered. I'd been so focused on the loss, on what was ending, that I hadn't thought about what might be beginning for both my parents. Freedom, maybe, the chance to discover who they were beyond their roles as spouses and parents. "You're right," I said. "I just wish it didn't hurt so much. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Something can be right and still hurt." I started seeing things differently after that. When Mom told me about a painting class she'd signed up for, I heard excitement instead of distraction. When Dad mentioned he'd been hiking on weekends, I recognized exploration rather than escape. They were both figuring out how to be themselves again, and maybe that was worth celebrating even as we mourned the family structure that was dissolving to make room for these new versions of them. 3 months into the separation, Mom called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. We typically talk on Sundays, following a schedule that gave our interactions comforting predictability. "I need to tell you something," she said, and my immediate thought was cancer or some other medical crisis, because what else would prompt this kind of call? "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Exactly. I've been seeing someone, dating someone, and it's getting serious enough that I think you should know. Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this was nowhere on the list. My mother dating? My mother, who'd been married since she was 23 and presumably hadn't been on a date since the Carter administration. "Who?" I managed to ask. "His name is Robert. He's in my painting class. He's a widower, very kind, and I enjoy spending time with him," she said this matter-of-factly, but I could hear the defensive note underneath, as if she expected me to object. "How long has this been going on?" "We've been seeing each other for about 6 weeks. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure it was more than just friendship." 6 weeks. While Dad was eating dinner alone in his sad apartment and Rachel was having panic attacks about whether marriage was even worth it, Mom had been dating someone from her painting class. "Does Dad know?" I told him last week. "We agreed when we started the separation that we were free to see other people. This isn't infidelity, sweetheart. Your father and I are separated." Technically true, but it felt like a betrayal anyway. Not legally or even morally, perhaps, but emotionally. The separation had been framed as a time for reflection, for figuring things out. Apparently, Mom had figured things out, and the answer was someone named Robert from painting class. How did Dad take it? He was fine, surprised, maybe, but fine. That word again, covering a multitude of possible reactions. "I need to go," I said abruptly. "I have a thing I need to deal with." "Sweetheart." I ended the call before she could finish, which was rude, but I needed space to process. Then I immediately called Rachel. "Mom's dating someone." "What?" "No, that's not possible. His name is Robert. He's a widower from her painting class." Rachel made a sound that was half laugh, Half sob. This is insane. They've been separated for 3 months. 6 weeks, apparently. That's how long she's been seeing him. Does Dad know? She told him last week. We were both quiet for a moment, separately processing this new information and what it meant for the already fragile architecture of our family. Should we tell Dad we know? Rachel asked. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't want to talk about it. But as it turned out, we didn't have to decide because Dad called me the next day. Your mother told you about Robert. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Are you okay? I'm fine. There was that word again. I mean it. I'm actually fine with it. Your mother deserves to be happy. And if this Robert person makes her happy, then I'm glad for her. He sounded sincere. But there was something else in his voice too. Not quite sadness, but a wistfulness maybe. The recognition that his marriage was really, truly over if his wife was already building something new with someone else. Have you thought about dating? I asked, immediately regretting the question because it was intrusive and weird. But Dad laughed, a real laugh that surprised us both. God, no. I can barely remember how to be a single person. Dating is about 10 steps beyond where I am right now. You'll get there, maybe, or maybe I'll become one of those eccentric old bachelors who lives alone and collects stamps or something. Dad, you're 56. You're not old. I feel old. But maybe that's just the divorce talking. It's not a divorce yet. It will be. We both know it. This trial separation is just a gentle way of getting there. The resignation in his voice broke my heart a little. Dad, it's okay, sweetheart. Really, your mother and I, we had a good run. 33 years is nothing to sneeze at. We raised two wonderful daughters. We built a life together. Just because it's ending doesn't mean it wasn't valuable. After we hung up, I sat with his words, turning them over in my mind. There was wisdom in what he said, an acceptance that felt healthy even if it made me sad. Endings were part of life. Things changed. People grew. And sometimes growing meant growing apart. Rachel's wedding arrived in late spring. 6 months after the separation began, and just as Mom and Dad were supposed to be making final decisions about their marriage. Instead, they'd essentially already decided, moving forward with divorce proceedings that were as amicable as such things could be. The wedding planning had been fraught with landmines. Who would walk Rachel down the aisle? Both parents, she decided, which seemed symbolically appropriate. Where would everyone sit? Would Robert be invited? Would that be weird? In the end, Robert did come, sitting discreetly in the third row rather than with family. Dad brought no one, arriving alone and looking distinguished in his tuxedo. Mom wore a champagne-colored dress that matched her newfound confidence, the kind of outfit that said she was done being invisible. I walked down the aisle as maid of honor, and I watched my parents watch Rachel, both of them crying openly at the sight of their youngest daughter getting married. In that moment, despite everything that had broken between them, they were united in their love for her. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. The reception was held at a beautiful venue with gardens and twinkling lights strung between trees. I gave my maid of honor speech, carefully crafted to honor love and commitment without being tone-deaf to the reality that my parents' marriage was ending even as we celebrated the beginning of Rachel's. During the parent dances, Rachel danced with Dad first, then Mom. I watched from the sidelines, sipping champagne and feeling Caroline's hand slip into mine. She'd come as my date, and having her there made the complicated emotions of the day more bearable. Your family is resilient, she observed. You think, look at them, they're all here, supporting Rachel, despite everything going on. That's not nothing, she was right. Whatever was broken between Mom and Dad, they'd managed to show up for their daughter's wedding with grace and dignity. Rachel was laughing with Tom, looking radiant. Dad was chatting with Tom's parents. Mom was introducing Robert to extended family members. We were all navigating this new configuration, finding our way through the unfamiliar terrain. Later, when the dancing was in full swing and the champagne had flowed freely, Dad found me at a table on the edge of the festivities. Can I talk to you for a minute? We walked out into the gardens, away from the music and laughter. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being the glue that held everything together these past months. I know you've been checking on both of us, facilitating communication, making sure Rachel didn't implode from stress. You've been taking care of everyone, and I don't think we've acknowledged that. I'm just doing what needed to be done. Still, it shouldn't have fallen entirely on you." He paused, looking back toward the reception, where we could see Mom laughing at something Robert said. "Your mother looks happy." "She does. I'm glad. I mean it. We weren't making each other happy anymore, and life's too short to settle for that. Are you happy, Dad?" He considered the question seriously. "I'm getting there. It's an adjustment, being on my own, but I'm figuring it out. I've started cooking, which is either very sad or very evolved. I can't decide which." I laughed. "Evolved. Definitely evolved. I'm thinking about taking a trip. Nothing crazy. Just a week, or to somewhere I've never been. Your mother and I always talked about traveling after you girls moved out, but we never did it. Too busy, too expensive, too much work. And now I'm realizing those were all excuses. Where are you thinking?" "Maybe Ireland. I've always wanted to see Ireland. You should do it." "I think I will." We stood there in the garden, father and daughter, watching my sister's wedding reception from a distance. Inside, the DJ was playing something upbeat and people were dancing. Our family, in its new, fractured configuration, was celebrating love and commitment despite having recent evidence that such things were fragile and impermanent. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we celebrated love not because it was guaranteed to last forever, but because it mattered while it did last. Mom and Dad's marriage was ending, but it had still been valuable. They'd still built a life and raised children and experienced decades of companionship. The ending didn't negate all of that. "I should get back," Dad said. "I promised Rachel I'd dance with her once more before the night ends." I watched him walk back toward the lights and music, and then I felt Caroline come up beside me. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I think I am." And surprisingly, it was true. The divorce was finalized 2 months after Rachel's wedding. Mom kept the house, Dad kept his apartment and most of his retirement accounts. They divided everything else with the kind of practical efficiency you'd expect from a couple that included an accountant and a woman who'd run the household like a well-oiled machine. For 3 decades, the day the papers were signed, I met Dad for coffee. He looked lighter somehow. A Sifa weight had been lifted, even though divorce seemed like it should add weight rather than remove it. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Relieved," he said honestly. "Is that terrible?" "No, I think it's human." We talked about his upcoming trip to Ireland, which had evolved from a vague idea into an actual booked itinerary. He was going for 3 weeks, staying in small towns and planning to do a lot of hiking. "I'm thinking about making it an annual thing," he said, "picking a new place each year and just going. No real plan, just exploration." "That sounds amazing. You should come sometime. You and Caroline, maybe. I'd love to have company. And I promise not to be the annoying dad who embarrasses you." The fact that he'd remembered Caroline's name and was offering to travel with us felt significant. Dad was building a new life, one that included being divorced and being a person outside of being someone's husband or someone's father. Mom, meanwhile, was planning her own new chapter. She and Robert were serious enough that there was talk of her moving into his house, though she hadn't made any final decisions. She'd also started taking more classes, exploring interests she'd put on hold during decades of marriage and child-rearing. "I forgot I like learning," she told me during one of our Sunday phone calls. "I spent so long focused on keeping the house running and making sure everyone else had what they needed that I forgot to ask what I needed. And what do you need? I'm still figuring that out, but I like figuring it out." Does that make sense? It did. Rachel and Tom settled into married life with the kind of ease that suggested they were going to be fine. Better than fine. Rachel had been worried that our parents' divorce would curse her own marriage somehow. But if anything, it seemed to make her more determined to communicate openly and honestly with Tom about everything. As for me, things with Caroline got serious enough that we started talking about moving in together. It was terrifying and exciting in equal measure, taking this leap into building something with another person. Are you worried it won't work out? Caroline asked me one night as we discussed logistics. Statistically, half of all relationships end, I said, echoing fears I'd been carrying since watching my parents' marriage dissolve. Sure, but the other half don't. And we don't have to repeat other people's patterns. She was right. Of course, we got to write our own story, make our own choices, create our own version of what a relationship looked like. My parents' divorce didn't doom me to the same fate any more than their marriage had guaranteed me happiness. 1 year after Mom sent that first text message about changing the locks, I found myself back at the house with Rachel, helping Mom box up things she wouldn't be taking to Robert's place. You sure about this? Rachel asked as we wrapped dishes in newspaper. I'm sure, Mom said firmly. This house has been wonderful, but it's time for something new. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, photos and yearbooks, old school projects we couldn't believe they'd saved. The gradual archaeology of a family's life together. You know what's funny? I said, holding up my kindergarten artwork. That message you sent about changing the locks completely freaked me out. I thought something terrible was happening. Mom laughed. I suppose it did seem ominous, didn't it? I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I genuinely just wanted to let you both know about the locks. And then everything else happened, Rachel added. And then everything else happened, Mom agreed. But I think everything else needed to happen. Your father and I were stuck. And sometimes you need to change the locks to realize you need to change everything. It was a metaphor that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The locks had been both literal and symbolic, an ending and a beginning. We finished packing as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting familiar shadows in unfamiliar ways. Soon this house would belong to someone else, would host someone else's family dinners and Christmas mornings and ordinary afternoons. But it would always be the house where Rachel and I grew up, where we learned what family meant. Even as that definition evolved, Mom sold the house to a young couple with 2 kids, and I like to imagine them creating their own memories there. Dad went to Ireland and sent us photos of green hills and stone walls and pints of Guinness. He looked happy in the photos, genuinely happy in a way I wasn't sure I'd seen in years. Mom moved in with Robert. And though it was strange at first to visit her in someone else's house, she seemed settled there in a way that felt right. She had her own studio space for painting, and her work was actually getting good. Rachel and Tom bought a house 3 blocks from where Caroline and I eventually found an apartment. We had family dinners sometimes, all of us together in various configurations. Sometimes it was just Rachel and me. Sometimes we included spouses and partners. Sometimes, in what would have been unthinkable a year earlier, we'd have dinners where both Mom and Dad came, sitting at opposite ends of the table, but civil and even warm with each other. This is weird, Rachel said at one such dinner. Which part? I asked. All of it. Mom's boyfriend passing the salad to Dad's travel buddy. US all sitting here like this is normal. Maybe it is normal now, I suggested. Just a different kind of normal. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. Normal was whatever we decided it was. Family was whoever showed up. Love could end without erasing the value of what had been. The keys sat on my keyring. Those new keys from that first change lock. I'd needed them once or twice before Mom moved out. And I'd probably never need them again now that the house belonged to someone else. But I kept them anyway. A reminder of the day everything changed, and the year we all figured out how to change with it. The first anniversary of my marriage to Caroline arrived on a crisp autumn day, the kind where the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. We'd plan a quiet celebration, just dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. But as these things often go, our families had other ideas. Mom wants to throw us a party, Caroline told me over breakfast. Scrolling through a series of increasingly enthusiastic text messages from her mother. My mom does too, I said. showing her my own phone where Mom had sent a detailed proposal involving catering and a guest list of 40 people. We looked at each other and laughed. Our mothers, despite their vastly different life experiences, shared an unshakable belief that all meaningful occasions require witnesses and cake. We could just let them do it, Caroline suggested. Pick a weekend, tell them to coordinate, and show up. That's either brilliant or asking for disaster. With our families, probably both. The party ended up being a joint effort between my mom, my dad, and Caroline's parents, which was either a testament to how far we'd all come or evidence that we'd lost our minds entirely. They decided on a Sunday afternoon gathering at a local park pavilion, potluck style, because apparently nothing says celebration of marital commitment quite like everyone bringing their own pasta salad. The day of the party, I woke up to a message in the family group chat. Over the past 2 years, the chat had evolved to include not just Mom, Dad, Rachel, and me, but also Tom, Caroline, and occasionally Robert when Mom remembered to add him before sharing something she thought he'd enjoy. The message was from Dad, bringing my famous chili, also possibly bringing Catherine. Is that okay? Catherine had been a steady presence in Dad's life for over a year now, but he still asked permission before including her in family events, as if worried he was overstepping some invisible boundary. I responded quickly, of course it's okay. We'd love to have her there. Rachel chimed in with a string of enthusiasm emojis. Mom added a simple thumbs up, which I chose to interpret as genuine approval rather than the passive-aggressive alternative. Caroline and I arrived at the pavilion early to help set up, though help mostly meant standing round, while our mothers directed the placement of tables and chairs with the precision of military generals planning an invasion. No, the drinks table should be here, Mom insisted, gesturing to a spot near the pavilion entrance. But then people have to walk all the way across for food. Caroline's mom, Patricia, countered. It makes more sense to have drinks and food together. Then where do we put the gift table? What gift table? You told everyone no gifts. Yes, but people will bring them anyway. I exchanged a glance with Caroline that said, this is our life now. Gradually, people arrived. Rachel and Tom showed up with enough food to feed a small army. Dad came with Catherine and his famous chili, which was actually famous only within our family. He wore the title proudly. Mom arrived with Robert, who'd apparently been drafted into carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers that Mom had insisted on despite this not being that kind of party. Caroline's brother brought his new girlfriend, a bubbly woman named Jen who seemed delighted by everything and everyone. My cousin Mike came with his kids, who immediately ran off to explore the playground equipment near the pavilion. Friends from work, friends from college, neighbors, and various other people who'd become part of our extended network trickled in carrying casserole dishes and bottles of wine. It was chaotic and loud and somehow perfect. I found myself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching everyone interact. Dad was talking to Caroline's father about golf, of all things, despite Dad having never played golf in his life as far as I knew. Mom was helping Patricia arrange food on the tables, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm that suggested they'd been coordinating events together for years, rather than having met only a handful of times. Rachel appeared at my elbow, holding two plastic cups of wine. Thought you might need this, she said, handing me one. Is this allowed? Aren't you? I gestured vaguely at her midsection. Rachel grinned, the kind of smile that held secrets. One small glass won't hurt, and we haven't told anyone yet. So don't make a big deal, you're pregnant. The words came out louder than I'd intended, and several heads turned our direction. Smooth, Rachel said, rolling her eyes. Yes, 3 months. We were going to announce it today, actually. But I guess you just did it for me. Within seconds, we were surrounded. Mom appeared seemingly out of nowhere, already crying. Dad looked stunned, then thrilled. Tom was laughing at the chaos while accepting congratulations. Patricia hugged Rachel so tightly I worried for the safety of my future niece or nephew. The party transformed from a celebration of Caroline's and my anniversary into an impromptu baby announcement get hurrying, and neither of us minded one bit. If anything, it felt right that our family celebration would expand to include new life, new possibilities, new chapters later, after the food had been devoured and the wine mostly depleted, after the small children had been chased down, and the gifts we'd insisted no one bring had been opened. I found Dad sitting alone at one of the tables, looking contemplative. "You okay?" I asked, sliding into the chair beside him. "More than okay," he said. "Just thinking about how different everything is now compared to 2 years ago. Different good or different bad? Different good. Definitely good." He gestured toward where Mom was laughing at something Robert had said. "Your mother is happy. Really, genuinely happy. And I'm happy for her. Are you happy for you?" He considered the question. "Yeah, I am. Catherine and I are talking about taking a trip to Scotland next spring. She's never been, and I've always wanted to go back." He paused. "I went once, you know, before your mother and I got married, backpacking with some college friends. I was young and broke, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. You never told me that. There's a lot your mother and I never told you, not because we were keeping secrets, but because once you become parents, you forget you were ever anything else. You forget about all the people you were before." I thought about that, about all the versions of my parents that existed before Rachel and I came along. Young versions who backpacked through Europe and stayed out till late and made mistakes and had dreams that had nothing to do with carpools or parent-teacher conferences. "Do you think you'll marry Catherine?" Dad looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "Maybe, probably not, though. We're happy as we are, and I think after 33 years of marriage, I've earned the right to just be someone's boyfriend for a while." "You have." I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, watching our weird, blended, somehow functional family. Mom and Patricia were now deep in conversation about baby furniture, already planning Rachel's nursery despite it being far too early for such things. Rachel and Tom were showing baby photos, ultrasound pictures. I realized to anyone who expressed even mild interest, Caroline was playing with Mike's kids, making them shriek with laughter. Catherine approached our table, and the smile Dad gave her was so genuine, so warm, that it made my chest ache in the best way. "Mind if I steal him for a walk?" she asked me. "He's all yours." I watched them head toward the walking path that wound around the park, Dad's hand finding Catherine's as naturally as breathing. They fit together in a way that looked easy, unforced. It was different from how he'd been with Mom. Less history, maybe, but also less baggage. "Your dad looks happy." Caroline appeared beside me, and I pulled her down into my lap. "He is." "They both are." I kissed her temple. "We are, I think, in our own weird ways." Speaking of weird, your mom just invited my parents to go wine tasting next month. Of course she did. Should I be worried? Probably, but also it's kind of nice that they get along. The party wound down as the sun began to set, casting everything in golden light. People started gathering their empty dishes and saying their goodbyes. Rachel hugged me extra long, whispering thank you for spilling the beans in my ear, even though we both knew she'd wanted everyone to know. Mom and Dad ended up standing near each other by the parking lot. Not together, but not pointedly apart either. I watched them exchange a few words, saw Dad say something that made Mom laugh, saw her touch his arm briefly in a gesture that held decades of shared history. They would never be married again. They would never be what they once were, but they were something, some new configuration of care and respect and shared parenthood that didn't have an easy name, but worked for them. "Ready to go home?" Caroline asked, threading her fingers through mine. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go home." 3 months after the anniversary party, I got a call from Rachel at 2 in the morning. Nothing good ever came from calls at that hour, and I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, heart already racing. "Rachel, what's wrong?" "It's Mom." Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "She's in the hospital. She had a heart attack." The words didn't make sense. Mom was only 58, relatively healthy, certainly not someone who had heart attacks. Heart attacks were for other people, older people, people who didn't go to painting classes and plan elaborate family parties. What hospital? Rachel told me, and I was already out of bed, pulling on clothes. Caroline woke up, immediately alert in that way she had. What happened? It's my mom. Heart attack. I have to go. I'm coming with you. We made it to the hospital in record time, parking haphazardly and running through the emergency room entrance. Rachel and Tom were already there, along with Robert, who looked about 10 years older than he had at the party, his face gray with worry and fear. Where's Dad? I asked. On his way, Rachel said. I called him right after I called you. A doctor came out to talk to us, a young woman with kind eyes who explained that Mom had suffered a myocardial infarction, the medical term for heart attack that somehow sounded more serious than the colloquial version. They performed an emergency angioplasty, inserting stents to open blocked arteries. She was stable now, sedated, but it had been close. Can we see her? Robert asked, his voice breaking on the last word. Family only right now. 2 at a time. There was an awkward moment where we all looked at each other, suddenly forced to define what family meant in our reconfigured constellation. Robert was Mom's partner, but they weren't married. Did that count? Rachel and I were her daughters, clearly family. But what about our spouses? Robert should go first, I said firmly. He was with her when it happened. He rode in the ambulance. The doctor nodded and led Robert away. Rachel grabbed my hand, squeezing hard. I'm 6 months pregnant, she said, seemingly to no one. Mom's supposed to be there when the baby comes. She's supposed to meet her first grandchild. She will, I said, trying to believe it. She's going to be fine. Dad arrived 20 minutes later, his hair disheveled and his shirt buttoned wrong. Clear evidence of how fast he'd dressed and driven. Catherine was with him, and I was glad. He shouldn't have to be alone right now, even if his ex-wife's current boyfriend was also in the waiting room. How is she? Dad asked immediately. We filled him in on what the doctor had said. He sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, looking lost. I should have. He started, then stopped. I don't know. I should have something. This isn't your fault, Rachel said. Heart attacks just happen sometimes. But I could see him processing guilt anyway, running through a mental checklist of things he might have done differently when they were still married. Made her eat healthier, insisted she exercise more, caught warning signs that probably didn't exist. Robert came back from seeing Mom, his eyes red. She's asking for her daughters, he said to Rachel and me. You should go. We went together, walking through sterile hospital corridors that all looked the same until we reached Mom's room in the cardiac ICU. She looked small in the hospital bed, diminished by tubes and wires and beeping machines that tracked her heart's every beat. Her eyes opened when we entered, and she tried to smile. Well, she said, her voice weak, but still recognizably. Mom, this is traumatic. Rachel started crying immediately, and I felt my own eyes sting. You scared us, I said, moving to take her hand carefully, mindful of the 4. Scared myself too. She looked between us, her gaze settling on Rachel's pregnant belly. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to meet that baby. I'm not going anywhere. You better not, Rachel said fiercely. We stayed with her until a nurse gently suggested we let her rest, that we could come back during regular visiting hours. Walking out of that room was one of the hardest things I'd done, leaving her there surrounded by machines in a sterile hospital room instead of in her cheerful house filled with her paintings and Robert's jazz records. Back in the waiting room, we found Dad and Robert in conversation, a sight that would have seemed absurd a few years ago, but now just felt sad and necessary. They looked up when we approached. She's going to be okay, I told them both. She's already complaining about the hospital food, which has to be a good sign. Dad's shoulders sagged with relief. Robert closed his eyes briefly, some terrible tension releasing. You should go home, Dad said to Rachel. You need rest. The baby needs rest. I'm not leaving, Rachel. Dad's voice was gentle but firm. Your mom is stable. There's nothing you can do here right now except make yourself sick with worry. Go home, sleep, come back in the morning. He's right, Tom added quietly. We'll come back first thing, eventually. Reluctantly, Rachel agreed. Tom led her away, and Caroline and I prepared to leave as well. But Dad and Robert stayed. To men who loved the same woman in different ways, keeping vigil together. That's something, Caroline observed as we walked to the car. Yeah, I agreed. It really is. Mom spent 5 days in the hospital. The doctors monitored her heart, adjusted her medications, and gave her stern lectures about stress management and lifestyle changes. She listened with the polite attention of someone who had no intention of becoming an invalid, no matter what her cardiovascular system had to say about it. We rotated visits, Rachel and I, Dad and Robert, Tom and Caroline, and various combinations thereof. The hospital room became a strange neutral zone where our family's complicated dynamics simplified into a single shared purpose, making sure Mom was okay. On the third day, I arrived to find both Dad and Robert there together, which was becoming less unusual. They formed an odd friendship through all this, bonded by their shared concern for Mom and their shared awkwardness about the situation. She's in physical therapy, Dad explained when I looked around for Mom. They're making her walk laps around the floor. How's she doing with that? Complaining about how ugly the hospital gowns are, Robert said with a fond smile. So, pretty well. I sat down in the chair by the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Can I ask you guys something? They both turned to me with matching expressions of mild concern. Do you think she's going to be okay? Really okay. The doctors keep saying things like if she makes lifestyle changes and with proper management. But I can't tell if they're being optimistic or just covering themselves legally. Dad and Robert exchanged a glance, having some silent conversation I wasn't privy to. Your mother, Dad said carefully, is one of the most stubborn people I've ever met. If she decides she's going to recover fully, she will. The question is whether we can convince her that fully recovered doesn't mean immediately back to doing everything she did before. She wants to teach her painting class next week, Robert added. I've tried explaining that's insane. But she won't listen to me. She won't listen to any of us, Dad agreed. She never has. It's one of her most frustrating and admirable qualities. They were right, of course. Mom had spent decades taking care of everyone else, running the household, managing schedules, making sure everyone had what they needed. The idea of slowing down, of accepting help, of admitting vulnerability, these went against every instinct she developed over her adult life. Mom returned from physical therapy looking exhausted, but determined, wheeled back into her room by a cheerful nurse who was clearly trying to convince her to rest. I'm fine, Mom insisted. I walked 3 laps. My heart is fine. Everything is fine. Mrs. Morrison, your heart is recovering. The nurse corrected gently. That's not the same as fine. After the nurse left, Mom looked at the 3 of us, her ex-husband, her boyfriend, and her eldest daughter. Aunt laughed suddenly. This is absurd, she said. Which part? I asked. All of it. Me in this ridiculous gown. You 3 sitting here looking at me like I'm made of glass. The fact that my life has become so complicated that my hospital room looks like the waiting room for a really awkward therapy session. We're just worried about you, Robert said. I know, and I appreciate it. But I need everyone to stop acting like I'm dying. I had a heart attack. It was scary, but I'm going to be fine. Because I have things to do and people who need me and a grandchild coming who I refuse to miss. Her voice was strong, determined, very Mom. But I also noticed the way her hand shook slightly when she reached for her water cup, the way fatigue shadowed her eyes. You're allowed to be scared, I said quietly. You don't have to be strong all the time. Mom's face crumpled for just a second before she pulled herself together. If I let myself be scared, I'll never stop. Dad moved to her bedside, taking her hand in a gesture that transcended their divorce, their complications, their separate lives. Then be scared with us. Let us be strong for you for a while. It was such a Dad thing to say, practical, supportive, deeply kind, and I saw Mom's walls crack just a little. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. We'll figure it out, Robert said from her other side. together, and somehow, impossibly, we did. Mom came home from the hospital with a pharmacy's worth of medications, a stack of follow-up appointments, and strict instructions to take it easy. She ignored approximately 70% of this advice within the first week, which we all saw coming. What we didn't see coming was the way the heart attack reshaped our family dynamics. Suddenly, everyone was checking in constantly. The family group chat, once used primarily for sharing memes and coordinating dinners, became a health monitoring system. Mom, did you take your evening meds? Rachel, blood pressure check complete. 120 to 78. Robert, who'd apparently become Mom's unofficial medical assistant, reminder. Cardiology appointment tomorrow at 2 p.m. Dad, who'd put all of Mom's appointments in his calendar despite them no longer being married. I'm fine. Everyone, please stop hovering, Mom. At least 3 times a day caroling, and I develop a habit of stopping by Mom and Robert's house at least twice a week, ostensibly to visit, but really to make sure Mom was following doctor's orders. Usually we'd find her in her studio painting, which the doctors had actually encouraged as stress relief. I'm creating a whole series about mortality, she told me during one visit, gesturing to canvases that featured abstract hearts in various states of breaking and mending. Very on the nose, I know, but apparently almost dying makes you less subtle. They're beautiful, I said, and meant it. Robert thinks I should try to show them in a gallery. Can you imagine me with an actual gallery showing? Why not? They're good enough. Mom looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When you were growing up, I used to paint sometimes. Did you know that? I remember a little. I gave it up when you girls were young. Too busy, too tired, too everything. And then I just forgot I'd ever been a person who painted. She touched one of the canvases gently. I lost myself somewhere in being a wife and mother, not because being those things was bad, but because I forgot I could be other things too. Is that why you and Dad split up? Partly, we both lost ourselves in different ways. He buried himself in work. I buried myself in routine. And eventually we looked up and realized we were strangers sharing a house. She turned to me. I don't regret our marriage. It gave me you and Rachel and 33 years of partnership. But I also don't regret it ending, because ending it gave me back to myself. It was the most honest Mom had ever been about the divorce, and I found myself grateful for it. Not just understanding, but actually grateful that she'd been brave enough to admit something wasn't working and bold enough to change it. For what it's worth, I said, I'm glad you found yourself again, even if it took a heart attack to get you there. Mom laughed. Let's not make that a prerequisite for personal growth. That weekend, we all gathered at Mom and Robert's place for what had become our new version of family dinner. The guest list included Mom and Robert, Dad and Catherine, Rachel and Tom, Caroline and me. 8 people, 4 couples, 1 family. Robert had learned to accommodate these gatherings with the patience of a saint, understanding that marrying into or whatever he was doing with this family meant accepting its peculiarities. We were midway through dinner when Rachel announced they'd settled on a name for the baby, Eleanor, she said, looking nervous. After Mom's mother, Mom burst into tears immediately, which set off a chain reaction of emotional responses round the table. Even Dad got misty-eyed, though he tried to hide it behind his napkin. Grandma Eleanor would have loved that, Mom managed. And I love it. Thank you. We were also thinking, Tom added, if it's okay, using your name as the middle name. He looked at Dad, Eleanor Marie. After both grandmothers, Dad definitely cried then, not bothering to hide it. I'd be honored. Later, after the meal, and the cleanup, and the coffee, I found myself outside on Robert's deck with Catherine. We developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by our status as newcomers to this complicated family dynamic. Do you ever feel like an outsider looking in? I asked her. Sometimes, she admitted, but mostly I just feel lucky. Your dad is wonderful, and watching him with all of you, it's special, even with all the complications. Especially with all the complications, I corrected. Exactly, we stood in comfortable silence. listening to the laughter drifting from inside, where everyone was looking at baby furniture catalogs and arguing good-naturedly about cribs versus bassinets. "Can I tell you something?" Catherine said suddenly. "Of course, your dad talks about your mom sometimes, about their marriage. He's never bitter or angry, just reflective. And he told me once that the best thing his marriage taught him was that love evolves. Sometimes it evolves into a different kind of love. Sometimes it ends, but if you do it right, even the ending can be loving." I thought about that, about mom and dad and how they'd managed to split apart without destroying everything they'd built together. It hadn't been perfect or painless, but it had been, as dad said, loving. "That's why I don't feel like an outsider," Catherine continued, "because this family knows how to make room for people. You expanded to include Robert, to include me, to include Tom and Caroline. You didn't close ranks or draw lines. You just opened up." She was right. We had opened up, made room for new people and new configurations. The family wasn't smaller because mom and dad divorced. It was bigger, more complicated, definitely, but bigger. Inside, someone had started playing music, and through the window I could see mom dancing with Robert while dad showed Rachel and Tom something on his phone, probably more photos from his Scotland plans. Caroline was helping Catherine's teenage daughter, who joined us for dessert with what looked like homework. This was family now. Messy, complicated, divorced, remarried, dating, pregnant, recovered, recovering. All of it. And it was good. Eleanor Marie was born on a Tuesday morning in early spring, arriving 3 weeks early and in typical Rachel fashion, making a dramatic entrance. Tom called me at 6 a.m., his voice shaking with excitement and terror, to say Rachel's water had broken and they were heading to the hospital. By noon, the waiting room was packed with all of us, me and Caroline, mom and Robert, dad and Catherine. We'd brought snacks and magazines and nervous energy, settling in for what everyone assured us could be a long wait for a first baby. Eleanor had other plans. She arrived at 2:47 p.m., the exact time I realized later that mom had sent the first text about changing the locks 3 years ago. Sometimes life has a sense of poetry about it. Tom emerged from the delivery room looking dazed and delighted, announcing, "She's here." They're both perfect. We took turns visiting, 2 at a time, following hospital rules. Mom and dad went first, together, which felt right. They came back wiping tears, and mom was already pulling up photos on her phone despite having just seen the baby in person. When Caroline and I finally got our turn, I stepped into that hospital room and found Rachel looking exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny, wrinkled, absolutely perfect baby. "Meet Eleanor," Rachel said, and I started crying immediately. "She's so small, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. The doctor said that's actually average." I held my niece carefully, terrified I'd break her, and looked into her scrunched up face. She had Rachel's nose and what looked like Tom's ears and the general appearance of an angry potato, and I loved her instantly with a ferocity that surprised me. "You're going to be so loved," I whispered to her. "You have no idea how many people are out there waiting to meet you." Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home and visiting hours were technically over, I found dad sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot, just sitting there staring at nothing. I knocked on the window, startling him. He rolled it down. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." He smiled. "I'm a grandfather. When did I get old enough to be a grandfather? When Rachel got old enough to be a mother, I guess." Fair point. He gestured to the passenger seat. "Sit with me for a minute." I climbed in, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching people come and go from the hospital entrance. "I was thinking about when you were born," Dad said eventually. "Your mom and I were so young, 25 years old, married for 2 years, completely terrified. We had no idea what we were doing. Did you figure it out?" "Eventually, sort of. I don't think anyone ever completely figures out parenting. You just do your best and hope it's enough." "It was enough," I said firmly. "You and mom, even with the divorce, even with everything, you did good. Look at us. Rachel's got a baby and a good marriage. I've got Caroline and a career I love. We're okay, you're more than okay. You're both remarkable. He looked at me, and I think part of that is because you watched your mom and me get divorced and you learned that sometimes the brave thing is admitting something isn't working. Is that what you tell yourself to feel better about it? No, it's what I've come to understand after 3 years of reflection and therapy. He laughed. So much therapy. Dad, yeah, I'm glad you and Mom got divorced. He looked startled. You are? Yeah, I mean, I wish it hadn't been painful for you both. But I'm glad you're both happier now. I'm glad you found Catherine. I'm glad Mom has Robert. I'm glad we figured out how to be a family in a different way. Dad's eyes got watery, and he pulled me into an awkward side hug constrained by the car's center console. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers. We sat there a while longer, and then Catherine's car pulled up next to us. She rolled down her window. I thought you might still be here. She called to Dad. Want to get some dinner? Yeah, Dad said. That sounds perfect. He looked at me. You and Caroline want to join us? Actually, I think I'm going to head home, but thanks. I watched Dad get out of his car and into Catherine's, watched them drive away together. Then I called Caroline. Hey, want to start trying? Trying what? For a baby. I just held Eleanor and I want one of our own. There was a pause, then Caroline laughed. That wonderful laugh I'd fallen in love with. Okay, let's start trying, really. But maybe we should discuss this when you're not high on new baby emotions. I'll feel the same way tomorrow. Then we'll talk about it tomorrow. Come home, love. I drove home through the spring evening, past familiar streets and new developments, past the house where I grew up now occupied by strangers and past my parents' separate homes where they lived their separate, happy lives. The keys from that first lock change were still on my keyring, useless now, but kept as a talisman. They jingled as I pulled them from the ignition, a small sound that marked endings and beginnings. 3 years ago, Mom had sent a text about changing locks, and everything had changed. My parents divorced. I met Caroline. Rachel got married. Mom had a heart attack. Dad found Catherine. We all found new ways to be a family. And now there was Eleanor, the next generation, who would grow up knowing that families could look 100 different ways and still be full of love. I walked into my apartment where Caroline was waiting, where our life together was continuing to unfold, where maybe soon there would be a baby of our own. Welcome home, Caroline said, pulling me into a hug. Welcome home, I echoed, and meant it in every possible sense. The locks had changed, the doors had opened, and we'd all walked through into beautiful, complicated, messy, perfect new chapters of our lives. Sometimes you needed to change the locks to realize you needed to change everything. And sometimes that was exactly what you needed to do. 2 years after the locks were changed, I got engaged to Caroline. We decided to have a small ceremony in the same gardens where Rachel had gotten married, because some places hold meaning even when everything else shifts. Planning the wedding required navigating the complicated dance of divorced parents. But by then, we'd all gotten good at that particular choreography. Mom would sit with Robert. Dad would sit with Catherine, the woman he'd met at a hiking club and had been seeing for several months. Rachel would be my maid of honor. Tom would walk Caroline's dog down the aisle as a ring bearer. Because why not embrace the absurd? The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I got up and made tea and sat on my apartment balcony watching the city lights. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Can't sleep either. Too excited for tomorrow. You're going to be a beautiful bride. Then one from Dad. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you for building something good with Caroline, for being brave enough to try. And one from Rachel. Remember when we thought the lock thing was the worst thing that could happen? Look at us now. Everything turned out okay. I looked at those messages from my fractured but functional family and realized Rachel was right. Everything had turned out okay, not the way any of us had expected or planned, but okay nonetheless. Better than okay. Actually, the wedding was beautiful. Mom cried during the ceremony. Dad's toast made everyone laugh. Rachel's speech as maid of honor was perfect. Robert and Catherine chatted amiably about their respective partners. Tom kept the dog from eating the ring cushion. Caroline and I promised to love each other for as long as it made sense to, which was more honest than promising forever later. During the reception, I found myself standing with both my parents, the three of us watching the dance floor. "We did good," Mom said quietly. "We did," Dad agreed. They were talking about Rachel and me, about raising us to be resilient enough to witness our family's transformation without breaking. But I thought they'd also done good in how they handled their own story, choosing honesty and change over comfortable misery. "Thank you," I said to both of them, "for showing us it's okay when things don't work out the way you planned, for teaching us to be brave enough to start over when something isn't working." Mom squeezed my hand. Dad put his arm round my shoulders. For just a moment, we stood there as the unit we'd once been, acknowledging what had been even as we embraced what was. Then Caroline appeared, pulling me toward the dance floor. And I went willingly. Behind me, I heard Mom say something to Dad, and him laugh in response. They were friends now, maybe better friends than they'd been spouses. It was a strange kind of happy ending. But it was ours. The locks had changed, the doors had opened, and we'd all walked through into whatever came next, carrying our keys and our memories and our capacity to love even when love transforms into something unexpected. In the end, maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything.